Good afternoon, 49er faithful. Welcome to another episode of Monday Afternoon Quarterback. We're talking 49ers today. I'm your host, Rob Schuh. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here on a win today. Today, we're joined by a very special first-time guest to the channel here on the show. Jordan, you're actually the fourth guest that we've had here on the channel, so you're going to be batting cleanup. No pressure. Jordan Elliott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. It was 42 days between Victory Mondays for us 49ers fans.
Goodness gracious.
It's been, there's still some things that need to be fixed and corrected, which obviously we'll get into, but it's been a much happier, 24-hour span since yesterday than it's been in the last month or so. So I am a glass half full kind of guy, so it's been a fantastic day.
Yeah, as am I, and I am glad that we are here to celebrate and not in some dark hole. I mean, the 49er faithful, let's be honest, it had gotten glum, and if this had been a loss to Chicago, could have been really ugly. Well, want to make sure to get you properly introduced here, Jordan. As you can see on the screen there, Jordan is a phenomenal follow on Twitter, goes by @splash_cousins there, and he does reporting on the 49ers for NinersNation.com. Very excited that you could join me here on this show. For me, it's a little bit of a milestone. This may be the last show that I do before hitting that vaunted 1,000 subscriber mark, which would be a big milestone for the channel. Want to take a moment to thank the Niner faithful, but certainly also want to thank you as my guest coming on today. Jordan, anything that you want to tell the fans a little bit about what your work with NinersNation.com is and how the viewers can follow you going forward?
So I essentially write for the team. That's the kind of the meat and potatoes of what I do. I'll write 3 to 4 posts a week generally, depending on the week. Like the bye week, there wasn't much going on, but generally I write 3 to 4 posts a week for them. And then I'll also cover the team in any capacity that I really can, whether that's covering a practice, attending event in the area that the team puts on. Anything that they really ask me to do, I'm here to do in any way that I can. Relay the access that I have to the team out to the fans. I am here to do as well. So it's not really like a set definition, but I kind of that's why I tend to say I cover the 49ers, because that's basically a way to put everything under one big umbrella.
That's right.
So that's pretty much what I do. You can find my work at NinersNation.com. And then as Rob mentioned on Twitter, I do a lot of my stuff there. A lot of stuff it's not really long enough to write a whole piece about. So I'm a big statistics guy. I like numbers. So if there's a cool stat or number that stands out, particularly on a Monday after a game, when I have time to go over and review everything, I'll put that up. I'm far from an X's and O's expert, but I do try to spend a good amount of time each week reviewing the All-22 film. So if I see a play or two that stands out, I'll do that as well. So pretty much any way that I can take what I see and kind of put my spin on it and share it out with the 49er faithful, that's pretty much my goal each week.
I love it. I highly recommend following on Twitter. I think you're a top 2 follow for me on 49ers Twitter. You're neck and neck with Matt Barrows, because I appreciate nuanced, fair coverage. I'm a statistic guy myself, and I like people who stay level-headed in a Twitter space that can be volatile, to say the least, at times. So I highly recommend anybody watching, anyone that sees the video, go follow on Twitter. You won't be disappointed. You had the opportunity to attend practices in the preseason. Am I correct in stating that?
Yes. So I attended, I believe, 14 training camp practices here in Santa Clara, and then I was also there for the 2 joint practices they had in Costa Mesa with the Los Angeles Chargers. So I was very fortunate to kind of get a sneak preview of what we would see this season and get kind of an up-close look. And at the time, what appeared to be sort of, I don't want to say quarterback competition, but kind of that's what it felt like to a lot of us. Maybe that wasn't the case all along, but yeah, it was definitely an interesting preseason, to say the least.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, it certainly must have set a certain level of opinions on the team, some expectations going into it. So before we get into the meat of the show, and today we're going to cover the Von Miller trade, the trade deadline, recapping week 8, we'll get into the playoff picture and certainly talk about some of the studs on the 49ers team today, including Elijah Mitchell and Deebo Samuel. But I thought before we did, it would be nice to take a step back and look at where we had been and what your observations were coming out of preseason. So what did you see? What type of expectations did you have for this team after you had observed those preseason practices?
So the first thing that I came away with was just that it was a talented team. I didn't think they were the best team in the league, but I also thought that they were in that kind of top 8 to 10 upper echelon of talent. It was very evenly dispersed as well. Remember, this was before guys like Kittle and Jason Verrett got hurt. So like on the defense, they had a Bosa, who I believe is a top 5 player at his position. They had Fred Warner, who I believe is a top 5 player at his position. And then they had guys like Jimmy Ward and Jason Verrett, who, while they may not be top 5, I view them as blue chip kind of borderline elite talents. So I thought that they had a really good, done a really good job of not only amassing talent, but kind of spreading it out around as well. Getting to watch a guy like Trent Williams every day in practice was an absolute treat. He's a guy who I believe is the best at his position, which, nowadays it feels like there's not the emphasis there once was on having a, cornerstone left tackle, but he is just one of one with his ability to not only protect the passer, but also get out in space and block. So what I came away with, my initial prediction was that they would be a 10 or 11 win team. It was one of the two. I apologize for remembering off the top of my head. I thought that they were one of the more complete teams in the division. Truth be told, I am not the biggest fan of Jimmy Garoppolo. I think he's just kind of an average quarterback who can get the job done. And objectively looking at things, Matthew Stafford is an incredible talent. Kyler Murray, incredible talent. Same goes for Russell Wilson in Seattle. So I thought the 49ers, just due to how good the roster was, 1 through 53, did have a chance to challenge for that division title. But my concern was always that while I thought they had the best roster top to bottom, they also had the worst quarterback. And I think that kind of, it takes away from having that strength 1 through 53 as we play out. So I, don't want to say I was wrong with my assessment, because I do think that they were right there in some of these games they lost on that 4-game losing streak. They beat themselves. Unfortunately, there's so many moving parts going on in these practices. And for the most part, they're not calling every single, if there's a glaring penalty, they're going to call it when they have the referees there. But for the most part, I didn't expect to see the amount of defensive pass interference penalties we've seen. I didn't expect to see the amount of holding penalties, some of these self-inflicted mistakes. So I do think that's where the 49ers still are. They are a 10 to 11 win team that probably has a chance, in my opinion, depending honestly on what happens this week, of pushing for that playoff spot. But I haven't really been, nothing's really changed for me in the last 8 weeks, other than I thought that they would be a more disciplined team due to the amount of retained staff they have. I know they lost Mike LaFleur to the Jets. They lost Robert Saleh, obviously. They have a new defensive coordinator, but they also have retained a lot of the staff, and obviously Kyle's in his 5th year now. So the lack of discipline has kind of been the biggest surprise to me. But I think they're as talented as they've always been, and I don't think talent is an issue for them. And I think we saw with that game, as we'll get into with the Bears, when they aren't committing stupid turnovers, when they aren't committing bad penalties and really bad spots, they're a pretty good football team. So all in all, I do think they still have a chance to get to that 10-win mark. Maybe 9 wins is a bit more realistic, but it should fall somewhere between that 9 to 11-win mark, in my opinion.
That makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like we had pretty similar takes on this team coming in. That was really my evaluation, was that we're talking about a team that is extremely talented top to bottom on the roster. I would agree that within their division, they have the worst quarterback. Certainly, you have to say the quarterback is the most important position within the NFL, and therefore that evens out a lot of the advantage that you have from the roster. And so would you say, when comparing the difference between your expectations and observations of this team versus the reality now, and I'm pleased as punch to hear you say that you still see the potential for that 10-win season, because I think 49er faithful have to hold out hope for that, while not maybe an expectation for it. Would you say then that the biggest surprise to you was just that undisciplined nature of the team to this point? Is that the biggest difference?
That, and then the other thing I would add is the defensive line, I thought looked very good during training camp. And I thought particularly during the 11-on-11s and particularly during the joint practices, when there was a little bit more of a competition and it wasn't just, guys taking it easy, getting back into the swing of things. They looked really good. And Dee Ford in particular looked really good. And he has at times this year as well. I just think that's an area that I probably misgauged a little bit, and maybe I thought they would be better than they actually have been. I thought Eric Armstead had a fantastic start to the season, and he's kind of tapered off in recent weeks. I know 49ers fans are a little upset due to the way he kind of lost containment on that Justin Fields, just, spectacular touchdown running out on 4th and 1. Samson Ebukam had a huge sack in the game last week, but before that, there wasn't really much that I saw that was flashing from him. And he is getting used to a new scheme and a new role. He's a guy who played outside linebacker in a 3-4 base. Now he's playing D-end in a 4-3. So there is going to be a little bit of an adjustment. Obviously, Kevin Givens has been hurt. Maurice Hurst has been hurt. So I thought that they had so much depth on that D-line. It was going to be able to keep guys like Nick Bosa and Dee Ford and some of these starters fresh. And I think due to injuries and just due to a little bit of lack of production as well, I probably thought that they were going to be better than they have been. But I don't think that they've been bad. I want to make that very clear. I'm not sitting here saying that they've been bad. I just expected that to be I don't think it would have been the same level as 2019 because it's very hard to replace DeForest Buckner. I thought that they would be the backbone of this team in the same way that the defensive line was in 2019.
Right. You look at this thing and you thought that was going to be the strength of the team. I mean, they have told us to this point that that is their goal, to build around the defensive line, that their intention is to build the defensive line to be the strongest unit on the team. And therefore, you look to that to be a strength. It appeared that they added some pieces that would complement one another in the offseason. You wonder if the rounding into form for Ebukam is something to do with the tweak that he experienced early on with the hamstring, I believe that it was, and hopefully the flash that we saw this week can continue for him. But with Kinlaw out, again, injuries continue to hurt this team. It will be interesting going forward. I have to agree wholeheartedly that I thought the defense would be a real strength for this team. I thought top 5 potential. Verrett went down, and I reevaluated that. But then weeks 4 and 5 gave me reasons for optimism, and we'll get into it later. But the defense seems to be a little bit of regression in the last couple of games. Well, saying hello to those that are in the chat. I see some familiar names. Want to say hello, and we will try to get your comments in here as well. I always struggle to do the multitasking when I'm being polite to a guest and trying to work in any good comments, especially any that are funny or relevant to the topic at hand. But that takes us to our first topic, and my hope was to get your quick reaction to the Von Miller trade, right? We're talking about the trade that occurred today that went down between the Rams and the Broncos. The Rams picked up Von Miller for next to nothing in his salary, right? They had Denver pick up the vast majority of the $9 million in change that he's owed for the remainder of the year and gave up a second and a third round pick, basically depleting the Rams' arsenal for the draft in its entirety. Did you find this to be a good move for Los Angeles?
Yeah, and that's one thing, I'm a guy, it's really funny because I'm a guy, I love the draft process. I love evaluating prospects. I love talking about it. I love the, whole philosophy of building a team around younger players on rookie deals. But anytime you have the chance to trade for a Hall of Fame caliber edge rusher, even a guy who's 32, who may not be the dominant force he once was, you have to do it. And particularly when you already have a force like Aaron Donald on that line. I've spent some time talking with people about how Aaron Donald is so good at commanding attention that really, if you can get plus athletes and, slightly above average players on the edge on either side of him, they're probably going to get plus production. We saw it from Dante Fowler Jr. before he ended up getting paid by Atlanta, I believe. And then we've seen Leonard Floyd there the last couple of years, who was a first-round pick who never really found his footing in Chicago. Then they put him next to Aaron Donald. All of a sudden, he's in double-digit sacks. He's racking up all these pressures. So now, as an offense facing them, you not only have to worry about Donald wrecking the interior, you have these 2+ edge rushers and Von Miller and Leonard Floyd on the outside. So while the price was a little steep, particularly when you consider the fact that they don't really have any other draft picks, at this point, it's very hard to argue with the process when the Rams are producing the results that they're getting year in and year out. And, I'm a firm believer in that, quarterback play really does define any successful long-term stint in the NFL. It's very hard to find any team that's going to be able to, continuously have success without a good quarterback.
Right.
But, admittedly, I'm a Cal Bear guy. I will defend Jared Goff anytime I can. But the fact that they had with Jared Goff for the amount of time they did with Jared Goff speaks volumes to their process and their, evaluation of talent and the way that they value, players and picks, building a roster. And then, I think Matthew Stafford is a tremendous upgrade over almost any quarterback in the league, but I definitely think he is over Goff. So you look at the results they had, again, with a kind of middling average quarterback like Jared Goff, and now they have an elite talent in Matthew Stafford. I don't blame them in the slightest for pushing all their chips into the table, because realistically, they have found ways to maximize value with players that they can get on day two, late in day 3. I think the only picks they have next year are 5th round and the 7th round, but the majority of that team really isn't going anywhere. And I thought that they did a very good job of identifying that this year, I believe, because they have a lot of money, and I think they have $41 million in dead cap, if I remember correctly off the top of my head.
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
Something like that. And then, so what I saw on, according to Spotrac, was that their cap hits for players on the team this year is $130 million. Next year, it's going to be north of $200 million. So they're going to have some decisions they have to make next year. There's probably some guys they won't be able to retain. But the thing is when you have a core of an Aaron Donald, of a Jalen Ramsey, of a Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, you're drafting really well. You're bringing in guys like Cam Akers. You're bringing in guys like Van Jefferson, who I don't think has gotten, quite the attention he deserves, because, Cooper Kupp's having this all-time season. They have other weapons. Right. They have guys ultimately who can step in. So I don't fault the process at all. Even though I might do things differently if I was running a team, it's impossible to argue with the fact that every single year that Sean McVay has been there, they have been a contending team. And they've done so without their first-round pick most of these seasons. They've done so making these blockbuster deals for proven players. And I just think that there's something to be said for saying, hey, the way I always look at drafts is if you hit on 50% of your picks, that's a plus in my opinion.
Right.
And let's say they spend they spent that 2nd-round pick, they spent that 3rd-round pick next year. What are the odds of them getting a player who in the intermediate right now in this window they have is going to make the impact that Von Miller is going to have? Odds are only one of those players will even pan out anyway. And if you did that, that would be a success. But what are the odds that you're going to have a guy that has that veteran savvy, that, ability to come in, step in next to Aaron Donald, contribute right away? So I just think the valuation that the Rams have had is very interesting. And while I think ultimately there may be consequences down the road, I respect that until they start losing games, it's very hard to argue with how they've gotten to this point and the thought process behind their decisions.
Right. And it is just a strategic play on their part, right? I mean, 49ers fans are consistently up in arms with the idea. It feels like the Rams are playing with monopoly money. The way that they spend their assets, move things around, it's disconcerting to most traditional NFL talking heads, because typically teams are a bit more reserved with their draft capital. You only have so much, and it leads a lot of people to actually question whether the salary cap is a real thing. The same happens when you have the Chiefs making the significant moves that they do, and they seem to just continually upgrade and upgrade and upgrade. What is your stance on that when fans come to the table with this idea that really you can get anything you want done, the cap isn't a real thing?
That's where I have pushback. I don't fault the Rams' thought process. I don't fault their pursuit of veteran players in place of draft picks. I do think that there is some misconception that because teams like the Saints or the Chiefs or the Rams have skirted around cap rules, that it doesn't exist. We've seen in New Orleans, they kind of just kept pushing around Drew Brees' money for a long time while he was there. He's no longer there. They're still paying. I don't know the number off the top of my head. I apologize, but I know there is still dead money tied into Drew Brees. They had to lose a player like Emmanuel Sanders. They had to cut a lot of players that, while they may not be superstar players, you have to make tough decisions where you're cutting capable veteran starting level players. And the Rams had to do the same thing last year. The Rams lost John Johnson, who I thought was one of the better safeties in football, never really got the recognition he deserved. They lost Troy Hill as well, who was one of the better slot corners in the league last year. Both guys playing for a number one defense. But if you're the Rams, you're losing those guys while you're also bringing in a Matt Stafford. Now you're bringing in a Von Miller. So while you do lose, like it's not like it just didn't exist and they're able to bring back everybody and add this talent. They're having to make tough decisions. They're just being so efficient with the guys that they're bringing in that it's not a net loss to lose very good players like John Johnson and Troy Hill. So I think ultimately, if they keep going down this road, I would be extremely impressed if they were able to continue to navigate the cap this way and not have a significant loss that's going to end up costing them. But ultimately, when you have a core in place of an Aaron Donald, of a Jalen Ramsey, the way I look at it, it's a different sport. But to me, it's almost kind of like having like a superstar player in the NBA, where you can just kind of surround them with shooters and role players. Like that's kind of how I view the Rams building this defense, is you have your stalwarts in Jalen Ramsey in the secondary, Aaron Donald on the defensive line, and I guess Leonard Floyd's in there too. He got a pretty sizable contract from them as well. I believe it's 4 years, $65 million, something like that. So you have these guys who are your, cornerstone pieces. And if you're able to just get, middling average baseline level competence from other positions, you can stay afloat. And then particularly when you add in the explosive offense they have with Matt Stafford. So I think it's a very interesting, dynamic that they have at play here. I just don't like the logic that they're doing this with absolutely no consequences. And while they are, 6-1, I believe right now, or 7-1. So I think they're 7-1. I don't think they have other bias. Sorry, 7-1. They're obviously in a much better spot than the 49ers are. So from here, the grass looks much greener. But if you were to go in that locker room and ask players around there, I'm sure they would love to have Troy Hill and John Johnson and some of these players around. It just unfortunately is part of the business. So looking forward next year, the guy I think they're going to end up having to part with is probably Darius Williams, who was a corner that they got, who was an undrafted free agent. I believe they picked up from Baltimore for next to nothing, who they turned into not only a starting level player, but one of the better number 2 corners in football. So they're clearly doing something right in this building, developing these players, coaching these players up, and maximizing value. So, like I said, there is a cost, but when you're so good at replacing your losses, that cost doesn't appear to be there. So I understand the misconception. I just don't think it's accurate to say that the cap doesn't exist.
Right. I'm with you 100% on that. I think what fans have to come around to is this idea that it's really asset allocation, right? You have a set number of assets coming in, and the cap sets forth rules, framework that you need to work within. But just like fantastic companies, Fortune 500 companies, when working within the framework of the IRS, come up with creative ways to move money and to do things that other businesses do not. And so I believe what you're seeing here with the Rams is just a different strategy than we're used to, being looser with that draft capital, feeling that they're hitting on these players they're trading up that draft capital for. So if you know you have an established veteran you're bringing in that you're confident will fit the system, will add value, to your point, you're giving away assets that are a gamble. You're giving away picks that you may or may not hit on. And if you feel that you're giving them up for core players that you know will fit, will work within the locker room, and will have success in the system, it's been a winning strategy to this point. It is fair to question, as Gabriel 2000 does here, what are you doing to team chemistry if you're unable to reward those players that come up in your own system? If you're bringing in hired guns, are you creating a sustainable locker room? But you have to say, to this point, the Rams have done it extremely efficiently, and we shall see if it bears fruit for them at the end of this season. Speaking of trades, what do you view for the 49ers coming up on this trade deadline? The trade deadline hits the NFL tomorrow, November 2nd at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Do you see the 49ers being in a position to be buyers, sellers, or simply staying put?
I think they'll end up staying put, honestly. If they do anything, I actually would expect them to maybe sell one of those guys, maybe from the defensive line. I want to make it clear I'm not advocating for this. I think they should keep the D-line depth that they have. I think it's one of the strengths of the team. But if they were to get a 5th-round pick offered for a guy like Katavius Street, Kevin Givens, or someone like that, well, I really like those players. I wouldn't fault them for wanting to move them just simply to build the assets that they don't have going forward due to the
cupboard is bare.
But I'm not a huge fan of in-season trades unless you are going to make a big blockbuster deal. The only one that they really had any success with was that trade for Emmanuel Sanders. And while I do think that they probably wouldn't have gotten to the Super Bowl and had the season they had they not gotten Sanders, getting a veteran who was the quarterback could trust and could come in and be that number 1 wide receiver was huge for them. But the next season, they already didn't have a 2nd-round pick, so then they have no picks from rounds 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
And when you are the 49ers and you are so, your slogan is brick by brick, and you are building through the draft and you're methodical, not having that amount of picks in the middle of the draft, because that's where the draft is won. 1st-round picks get a lot of the attention. That's what draws in. That's what gets all the ratings.
Yeah.
But really, these great teams are built in between picks, 35 and 100 usually. Those are where you really can build a team. That's where you really get the strength of a roster when you're building these Super Bowl contenders. So I just don't like, and that's my thing going forward of why I wouldn't want the 49ers to really be buyers at this point, because A, they don't really have the capital to part with. And B, I don't see them as being a player away. That trade for Emmanuel Sanders, I think, was worth it because you could make the argument, like I just mentioned, they probably don't get as far as they do without his services that year.
Right. You probably don't make the Super Bowl without Sanders.
Exactly. So I think that was something that you could justify the cost there. But this year, I don't see them as being a team that's just a player away from the Super Bowl. I've been steadfast in my belief that if they can get to the playoffs, maybe win a game in the playoffs, but even just getting to the playoffs to me would be a major victory. It lays the ground for some consistency, which they haven't had in the last 25 years when they've been a team that sparingly made the playoffs. So I just see them as just being a team where, hey, they could go on a run and surprise some people. They could get hot at the right time. You never know. But you have to be extremely careful with your assets moving forward, considering you're not going to have a first-round pick for the next 2 seasons due to that trade-up for Trey Lance. So yes. I expect them to stand pat. Like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if they tried to add some corner depth maybe, but I don't really see anybody who's out there that's worth, a conditional 6th or a conditional 7th or something that they could justifiably part with. So I would expect them to probably just stand pat ultimately.
Yeah, to your point with the Emmanuel Sanders trade, that was absolutely of value to the 49ers because of the lift it gave them in season. But it was painful the next year when you had him move on to another team and the loss of the draft capital. You would think that memory stuck with John Lynch on draft day being out there. And I think that the same thing can be said for moves that we made last year in 2020 to stay afloat, that there were some Band-Aids we applied where we hurt ourselves in the future. And for me, I would hate to see the 49ers hurt future seasons by doing something where they're trying to stay relevant this year in an effort that may be a bit misplaced, because to your point, they're not just one player or one missing piece away from being relevant. As I looked at it, in order to buy, you've really got to feel that you're that one piece away. And I think we're in agreement that they're not. In order to sell, they would have had to lose to Chicago. It would have to have felt that the season was beginning to slip away. And then I thought you would see a bailing on the one-year deals for anyone that had value to a contender that didn't forward into the plans for the San Francisco 49ers going forward. If they didn't plan to re-sign someone on an expiring deal, then time to try and get what you can so that you can replace that body, because I believe they only have 31 players under contract for next season. I see them as staying put, barring a couple of cheap moves. I tried to look for a cheap defensive tackle. I thought to myself, with Kinlaw going down, you really do need to increase your stoutness against the run there. But when I look at guys on 1-year or expiring deals, the type of player on a team that might be interested in dealing, like Shamar Stephen on Denver, like it's not a player that's anything more than a role player, right? There are no studs available at this time. I certainly think that you're right in looking toward the cornerback room. And, it's funny, but 49ers fans continue to call for Jimmy Garoppolo to get traded. I think they have to resign themselves to the fact that the 49ers are most likely, barring a crazy offer from somebody, going to be staying pat at the quarterback position.
Yeah, and that's something where I would actually have an issue with it if they did move him for like a 5th or a 6th at this point, because you based your entire offseason, a lot of your free agency decisions, a lot of your entire, philosophy going into this year was based around having Jimmy here and that $26 million that's tied to him. And again, I'm far from a Jimmy Garoppolo, apologist. I have been clamoring for them to move on from him for pretty much since the playoffs in 2019, when it became apparent that Kyle Shanahan didn't trust him, that it became apparent he wasn't going to elevate this roster.
Yep.
But I also understand that you can have games like you just had in Chicago where he had a very rough start, but he somehow found his rhythm through, and he's able to execute this offense at a level where you can at least get some kind of competence at times. To me, his issue, I don't think he's very talented. I think he's an average run-of-the-mill quarterback. Consistency has always been his biggest problem.
Yes.
So if we can kind of find some consistency and string some nice games together, then I think he's worth keeping around. And while I'd add real quick, when I was at these training camp practices, it was very apparent that Trey Lance was obviously the more physically gifted quarterback. He's bigger, he's faster, he's stronger, bigger arm. But I thought that Jimmy Garoppolo did a much better job in these, move the ball drills, situational, red zone. It's not a knock on Trey Lance. It's more so the fact that Jimmy's an 8-year NFL veteran.
Right.
Trey Lance is a 21-year-old rookie. So I think keeping him around at this point, they almost have to do it. Just like you said, if some team comes in offering like a 2nd-round pick or something, I would do it in a heartbeat. I don't think that's going to happen. And moving him for peanuts at this point just doesn't make sense to me because, again, it goes against everything that you did this offseason. And then that's when I would really start to question the decision-making and why they didn't just, go out and get an Andy Dalton type quarterback that's a veteran, a Joe Flacco, a quarterback that's, could have held it down the first couple of weeks, but ultimately could move on from and then hand the torch over to Trey Lance.
Yeah, that was my point with the strategy as well. It sounds like we're aligned on that theory because I looked at where was the issue for the 49ers when the story came out of the Seth Wickersham book that, we turned down a second at the draft and fans were in an uproar. And I get it. That's an emotional response of hindsight is 2020 looking back. But once you had gotten to the draft, it was too late. If you want to criticize the moves by the 49ers, that criticism is due earlier in the offseason when they came up with this idea of attempting to win right now and build for the future. That was the flawed strategy in my book and what you should be criticizing if you don't like the fact that Jimmy G is still on the roster. Once they decided that course of action, we were basically committed to Jimmy G and his health throughout 2021 because they knew basically what they had from Trey Lance. All right, well, let's get to some more positive news here and let's get into a Week 8 recap, which, again, in case you were not on planet Earth, yesterday, Niner faithful, that was a win for the 49ers, 33-22 over the Chicago Bears. Let's break down a little bit of what we saw. So breaking down the 49ers run game, do you see Elijah Mitchell continuing to progress as a runner within the 49ers offense?
I do 100%. I actually wrote something that was published this morning about how Elijah Mitchell and that running game sparked an offensive resurgence this week. I think even going back to that, game in the monsoon against the Colts, they had a lot of success running the ball. And I'm a big guy in terms of draft evaluation stuff. So I watched a good amount of Elijah Mitchell before he was drafted by the Niners, and then I really ramped it up once they did get drafted by him. And you could see on the coach's film from his time at Louisiana that he was a fast guy. He wasn't afraid to go north to south. A lot of these guys who have that plus speed want to just get around guys. He wanted to run through guys. The first couple weeks of the season at the NFL level, I did think that he had some instances where he wasn't hitting the right gap. It appeared that he wasn't following the blocks that he was supposed to in the way that these runs were designed. But he had so much physical talent that a lot of that was being masked. Or it was just kind of overshadowed. So before the Colts game, I had said a couple times that I didn't think he had been, just fine or serviceable or whatever words we were using. I thought that he had struggled a little bit. He was 22nd in the league in rushing yards over expected at that point, which isn't terrible. But
below average.
Exactly, and especially when you consider the scheme and how well that the offensive line has been blocking in the run game.
Right.
He's now 8th 2 weeks later. So he's made a significant jump from 22nd to 8th in rushing yards over expected. And I think that matches up with what I've seen and many have probably seen with our own eyes over those last couple weeks. And that's a big thing. I love citing data, but if you don't see with your own eyes what you see on these graphs and plots and lines and all that stuff, it doesn't matter. But I do think in Elijah Mitchell's case, it does match up very well. And these last 2 weeks, the Colts game and the Bears game, he has made that vast jump from a guy that was they didn't have anything really better at the time. He was, I guess you could argue, he was getting the job done, to now he's a guy that's not only taking them from a level of, baseline efficiency, he's putting them into a level of explosiveness that's in turn opening up the rest of the offense, giving them a little bit of flow and rhythm that we haven't seen. I thought by far the second half in Chicago was the best half of football that the offense had played all year. I thought it was better than the first half in Detroit. They averaged 9.7 yards per play in that second half, and they scored on every single drive except for the final drive where they took 3 knees in victory formation to end the game. So, I think Elijah Mitchell is taking strides. And again, he's a day 3 pick. He's a rookie. I'm not expecting him to go out there and be, Barry Sanders right off the bat. But I do think that it's encouraging to see that while he may have had some struggles early on, he is growing each week and getting better and better. And I think that that is huge for the 49ers because right now they don't really have anybody else they can rely on in the running back room. We saw for a couple weeks there, Kyle Juszczyk was getting a lot of snaps that would normally go to a running back, but now they have Jermichael Hasty back. They have Mitchell performing, and now Jeff Wilson Jr. will be coming back soon as well. So I expect the 49ers run game to continue to trend upwards. I don't know that they'll necessarily get back to that just dominating level we saw for a couple seasons. but I do think that they won't be in that kind of abysmal, between 2 and 3.5 yards a carry we saw for a good portion to start the season this year. I think they will get closer to that 4.5, 5 yards a carry we've grown accustomed to.
Ooh, that is good news for the 49ers. Yeah, it seems as if Kyle Shanahan and Bobby Turner have done it again, have found another late round gem, brought him in and just coached him up. Back-to-back 100-yard games from Elijah. Highest yards over expected per run, to your point of jumping forward by a wide margin on Sunday. He was around +3 for Sunday's game. As far as rushing leaders from yesterday, I found this to be a very amusing stat that I believe it was PFF put out there. But it was that the number one rusher was Elijah Mitchell with 137 yards. The number two rusher they put as Elijah Mitchell after contact, 135 yards. So all but 2 of his yards yesterday came after contact. And the next running back behind him was Najee Harris with 91 yards from scrimmage. Fields was in there with 103 yards, but obviously a quarterback, so they were limiting it to running backs. It is a fantastic statistical couple of games for Elijah Mitchell, but it begs a question for me, and I'm curious if you have an opinion on it. Why 0 from Sermon? It felt as if we saw some flashes, but now it is just complete abandonment, shift everything to Elijah. And I get that Elijah Mitchell is flashing greatness. You want to stick with the hot hand. I understand all of that. But in years past, it felt like much more of a balanced platoon attack from Shanahan in the use of his running backs to save fresh legs. Do you see anything concerning that warrants that lack of playing time by Sermon?
Admittedly, there's nothing that I can point to that is something that I've seen on tape from him in the limited reps he had in the preseason, the few he's had this season, in the regular season, and what I saw at training camp. I did not like the move at the time when they traded up for Trey Sermon.
Interesting.
Again, I did probably 1,000. I'm not even joking or exaggerating this number. I did probably close to 1,000 mock drafts over the course of early January till the time of the draft.
Nice.
Again, it's like my favorite time of the year. So I get very invested in a lot of guys who are still around that may not be household names, but are, around pick 80, 90, 100, whatever. And there was a lot of talent left on the board. So when they were trading up, I thought it was for a corner. I thought it was for an edge rusher, maybe. I cannot tell you how disappointed I was when I saw the pick come in and saw that it was Trey Sermon, running back, Ohio State. And that's not anything against him as a player. It's against my personal philosophy of getting value and extrapolating the amount of value you can in a given draft. And I just didn't like the pick in that spot. And again, it's not the player himself. It's just because, and this is part of it, is once you take a guy, while it's the third round for that position, that's still relatively high. And especially when Shanahan's shown us that he can get production from undrafted free agents like Raheem Mostert and Matt Breida, and he did the same thing with Alfred Morris. He's able to get these guys that aren't, household names coming out that are going to be super early round picks, and he's able to turn them into viable rushers. So now there's this expectation. Well, hey, you took, I remember thinking to myself, like, hey, well, Kyle Shanahan must see something here he really likes. If him and Bobby Turner and these guys got together and they're like, we're going to take this guy in the third round, there has to be something there. And I will say the biggest thing to me that I liked about Trey Sermon was that he didn't really have, the blazing home run speed we've grown accustomed to, again, from guys like Mostert and Breida, and we're seeing from Mitchell now. But he had great balance through contact. He was a guy who I thought was really good about taking a gain that maybe only goes for 2 or 3 yards for most backs and turning it into 5 or 6. And I thought that, the 49ers had been lacking that in recent years. For a long time, I made the argument that I really liked Ezekiel Elliott because while he may not be this guy who's breaking these big runs, he's consistently getting 4, 5, 6, and that adds up over the course of a game. So I kind of envisioned a similar role for Sermon, if that makes sense, where he would be a guy that could run between the tackles, that could wear down a defense over the course of a game. He's not necessarily this big bruising back, but he definitely has some power behind him. He runs with a little bit of oomph that's there, he definitely has that kind of ability to, smack a defense and be difficult to tackle over the course of a game. So all signs kind of pointed to him being the bell cow and being the guy that's going to get that, larger portion of the carries. And I thought Mostert would probably, come in and be the guy that's going to rip off 8 or 9 carries a game and have that explosive ability. So now with Sermon getting absolutely nothing, and Mitchell taking over, the optics are terrible because now you get fans sitting there saying, well, we got this guy in the 6th round. We traded up. We wasted this 3rd round pick. He's not seeing the field. And again, I always say if you can hit on 50% of your picks, I don't really care where you take guys as long as they pan out. But I understand the optics from a fan's point of view where you're like, well, how did you miss this badly to the point where the guy can't even get on the field? So it's early. I don't want to make any judgments. He may finish the year really strong. He may come out next year and be a big part of what they have to do. I just have to, I apologize for going on a rant here, but I just have to add that I was against this from the beginning. So this doesn't surprise me in the slightest. And I think that the 49ers, had they taken Trey Sermon in the 7th round, nobody would be upset about this right now. They would be happy that they got Elijah Mitchell on day 3 and he's been successful. But when you take a guy in that spot, you make a trade up to get him, you're making a statement that this is our guy. We have a plan for him. And when you already missed pretty bad on Joe Williams the last time you took a running back that high,
real bad.
It leaves a really bad taste in people's mouths. So I can totally understand the frustration from 49ers fans. I wish I could give you some sort of, piece of information that, this is why they're not playing him or this is why they're reluctant. I truthfully don't get it, and I'm just as confused as everyone else.
Yeah, it's odd to me. I also pictured him in the more of the Tevin Coleman role within this offense, between the tackles, being the bell cow of the offense. I thought that the statistics on him showed short area quickness. I like your description of his ability to run through contact, and that seemed to really fit how the 49ers might use him. It's just so strange to really abandon any carries at all. I'd be not as up in arms right now if there had been 3 carries, 4 carries. That would have fit my narrative. One hopes that you'll see all of these rookies start to contribute at some point. Looking at other topics within the game breakdown, when we look at our quarterback position, what we saw from Jimmy yesterday in front of Jimmy's 100-plus friends and family was a very clean game, 0 turnovers. His uniform didn't get dirty. He stayed upright the entire game, except when he plunged himself into the end zone twice forcefully. It was a great game by Jimmy G's standards. I mean, a good game by any quarterback standards. Do you expect to see play closer to this level going forward? Or do you see a bit of reversion by Jimmy to the bad Jimmy that we're used to seeing on a daily basis on a weekly basis, when he starts to come back up against the Cardinals and the Rams and tougher teams in the following weeks?
I hope this isn't me skirting the answer, but my answer would be both. Like, I think you're going to see good Jimmy be there. Because again, my whole issue with Jimmy Garoppolo has never been I don't think he's, extremely talented. I think he's an average, somewhere between probably 14 and 20 in terms of, just overall talent and ability.
Right. And just to clarify, that's 14 to 20 of the world's best quarterbacks. Like, that is not a knock on the man. I know I'm putting words in your mouth there, but I think that's where you're going with that. That's respectable. You are the 14th or 20th best quarterback in the world, if that's your ranking.
Mm-hmm. And my biggest problem with Jimmy is that it's the lack of consistency, is that we'll see flashes of good, and then the next play just leaves you scratching your head like what just happened?
Just boneheaded plays, yeah.
It makes no sense. And then there are some limitations, I believe, as well, where he is, for whatever reason, reluctant to push the ball down the field and outside the numbers. And for a long time, I kind of look past it because a lot of what Kyle Shanahan does is schemed up between the numbers, between the hashes, over the middle. But I think a lot of that does come back to that's also him understanding his own quarterback's limitations and knowing that if he's going to have any kind of sustained success on offense, they're going to have to execute there. So I'll give a perfect example. I sent out a tweet during the game. It was right after Jimmy in that 2-minute drill right before the end of the half. He hit that deep ball to Deebo, which I think was the best deep ball I've ever seen Jimmy throw outside that counted. Maybe that one to Kittle in the Super Bowl, but that one obviously didn't count. So I don't like bringing that up because it just didn't count. So that ball to Deebo was probably one of the better balls I've ever seen him throw. And the fact that he stepped in and was willing to let that rip, that's something that I think he's been reluctant to do as well. And it's crazy when you think about how high his turnover rate is and how many turnover-worthy throws he has. He still seems like, if you looked at his box score, you'd think the guy was like the second coming of Brett Favre in terms of like just being willing to put the ball wherever and take chances. Not saying he's as talented as Brett Favre. I hope that doesn't get misconstrued. But in terms of
someone will misconstrue that, I'm sure.
not being afraid to just let the ball rip and throw it. Hey, whatever happens, happens. I'm going to let my guy make a play. But if you watch him play, he doesn't play like that. I'm reluctant to ever say guys play scared, but it feels like he plays scared at times. So when he stepped into that throw and he made that throw, I was very encouraged. But the flip side is the next play, they have one play to run before they're going to have to come out and kick a field goal. Deebo Samuel has 3 or 4 yards of open grass in front of him on the other side of the goal line. What I believe is a relatively routine throw for most NFL quarterbacks.
Sure.
I thought that it was horrendous. It was low. It was behind him. It was just not a good throw. And the 49ers ended up taking a field goal. And everybody gets enamored with the big deep ball that he threw, which he deserves credit for. That's another thing.
Absolutely.
I don't think he's very good, but I'm also not one of these people that's going to sit here and just dump on him every chance that I get. I think that he deserves credit for making that throw, but people then overlook the following play when that can be turned into a touchdown and have the 49ers go into halftime tied rather than down 4 points. It gets forgotten, and that kind of sums up the entire Jimmy experience, in my opinion, is we'll have these plays where he makes a throw downfield, or like the one I love bringing up is that people love bringing up the 3rd and 16s against the Rams. Remember,
yes, I was there for that game, so I definitely love those throws.
Yeah, and so they won, and he stood tall. They brought pressure, but he underthrew Emmanuel Sanders. That should have been a walk-in touchdown. For most quarterbacks, they're putting it on the receiver. That's a walk-in touchdown. You don't even have to worry about Robbie Gould coming in to kick a field goal, and it only happened because the Rams blew a coverage on that play horrendously because they had a rookie playing safety back there at the time. But again, he made the throw. It worked. But that's the problem, is that so many of the mistakes that he does make get kind of masked by the good that he does. So he's already getting dumped on for the bad that we all see. I'm not going to sit here and act like it's like, everybody's sweeping Jimmy's problems under the rugs. It couldn't be farther from the truth. But he also has these moments where he'll look really good. He just can't seem to string together a consistent level of above average play. And that's the most frustrating part. So to answer your question, going forward, I think what you'll get is you'll get a guy that's going to hit 4 or 5 of these throws a game that you need to have. That'll be a third down where you're sitting there, it's 3rd and 11. You're like, how did he just complete that? Like, to me, the biggest throw he made all game wasn't the Deebo throw. It was that, I think it was 3rd and 8. It might've been 3rd and 11. My apologies. To Mohamed Sanu. When Chicago brought a zero blitz, and they pretty much brought everyone and left everybody who was eligible receiver was being covered in man coverage one-on-one. And he put a ball on Sanu, and he put it in front of him and out where only Sanu, who has a very good wingspan, could go out and get it. And that, to me, has been one of Jimmy's biggest problems, is that he consistently is putting balls behind his receivers. And people always say, oh, if it hits him in the hands, they should catch. When you're running at the speed that NFL receivers run, and you have to go back across your body, it is very difficult to just sit here and be like, oh, they got their hands on it. They should have caught it. And I think Deebo is victimized by this more than anyone, because Deebo has drops that are his fault. And I think that people tend to just, Kendrick Bourne was the same way. Kendrick Bourne would have a couple drop balls that were on him, but then he'd have these balls thrown high behind him, low. And then people just run with, oh, the 49ers receivers can't catch anything. They have a drop problem, when I think it's a ball placement problem. So I think ultimately you'll get a Jimmy that's just going to kind of be who he's always been. He'll make enough of these throws to get by. They'll scheme open looks that he will execute and hit. But he's also going to have 2 or 3, plays a game that leave you holding your breath, throwing your remote at the wall, getting upset, throwing your arms in the air. And it's kind of who he is at this point. And I just don't think it's realistic to expect that to change. The only thing I would add real quick is maybe he comes out with a little bit more confidence, because I haven't seen him play with this level of fire and intensity in probably 2 years. And I do think that, it's unrealistic to just think that a guy being more confident is going to suddenly make his talent level higher. I do think that the human element does play into this. And it has to be very tough knowing that you're basically playing, on a very short leash. At most, you're probably going to get this season. You're not going to be on this team next year in almost all certainty. I'm not sitting here trying to have a pity party for the guy, but I can understand from a human element standpoint how it has been tough. And it felt like the game in Chicago was kind of the first game all year where they just kind of shut out the noise and went out and played. And if that can parlay into some momentum going forward, we might get a more confident Jimmy. I just don't think that it's going to necessarily make him good Jimmy, if that makes sense, because I still think the bad, errant, boneheaded, whatever adjective you want to use, plays will still exist.
Yeah, inconsistent Jimmy is Jimmy, right? That is the player, and that is what frustrates fans. You have Manuel Acuna coming in here. We know what we have with Jimmy G. Never bad enough to get benched, never great enough to be a game changer. Time to pull the plug unless we want to be conformists. That's the attitude that fans have because they know what they're going to get with Jimmy on a consistent basis. And it just seems to be inconsistent. I would agree with Jan here that if the O-line continues to protect in the way that they have, it will certainly be a boon for Garoppolo. And I think you hit on something that's big for me, which is the confidence issue. Kyle Shanahan, with his perfectionist way of coaching, I think can create a circumstance for players where they're basically swimming in their own heads, right? They're wrapped up in this idea of what's expected of them in the moment versus just being out there playing ball. And I think 2017 illustrated that when Jimmy is out of his head and just playing ball, he has the skill set necessary to be a bit of that gunslinger that you mentioned. He has the ability to make these throws. What I continue to see from him, especially with some of those throws that seem to be as if he's throwing it directly to a linebacker, is a switch gets crossed up there, right? And it is fair to believe that mental outlook could play a factor there because we're talking about not just split seconds. We're talking about milliseconds when you are out there on the field. You really shouldn't be thinking as much as just reacting. And if he is up in his own head, you could see that actually playing out that way and being detrimental to his success. I do wonder, from Bryant's question here, good Jimmy, bad Jimmy, who do we get this week against the Cards? Just a quick prediction on your part with nothing to back it up. What do you see coming from Jimmy against Arizona?
I think we're going to get somewhere in the middle. I think that he's not going to have to have as much on his plate. I'm reluctant. It's so funny. Arizona has given the 49ers the two worst successful run conversion rates that Kyle Shanahan has had as head coach. One was in 2019, and I believe one was last year, week 1, 2020. So even though on paper the Cardinals are giving up the second most rushing yards per attempt in the entire league, they're 31st in the whole league in yards per carry allowed. Like, I want to just say that this should be a week where Elijah Mitchell goes crazy. Maybe Trey Sermon finally gets featured. Maybe they feel comfortable bringing Lance back in for some design stuff. I think the way the game flow will be dictated, I don't think much will be asked of Jimmy. So I think we'll get a more efficient play from him. But also, I do think that Arizona's defense has been a lot better this year. It's going to hurt without them having J.J. Watt. But I do expect that there will probably be that, again, boneheaded play, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And it's a matter of, is Arizona going to take advantage of it or not and turn that into a turnover? I can't confidently say, he's going to throw 2 picks or this or that, but I don't think that he's just going to come out and be this efficient guy that's dicing up the defense. But I don't think that they're going to be as reliant on him to carry the offense in the way that we've seen the last 3 times really they've played, because they didn't really get the run game going too much that first game. They were without Deebo and Brandon Ayuk. And then we saw, obviously, in 2019, both of those games against the Cardinals, they didn't really run the ball really well. And that was, that's the game that, people usually use to go back and say, hey, well, we saw this from Jimmy, that Halloween game almost 2 years ago to the day, where he had that big performance. And then, obviously, that game, I believe they went down 16-0 at home and they ended up coming back largely because they were able to move the ball in the air while not doing so on the ground. So, I'm just trying to rationalize this in my head. I want to say he shouldn't have to throw the ball based on Arizona's run defense, but for some reason, the last couple seasons, this Cardinals defense has given Kyle Shanahan and that running game issues. So I guess this is the last time I'll say it, and I'll just have to accept I'm wrong if I am wrong here. But I do think that the 49ers will continue this rhythm on the ground, and Jimmy will have to manage the game rather than carry the offense, if that makes sense. And they'll start getting some of these design looks. They'll start running these, drift routes and crossers and stuff over the middle to get into a bit of a flow where he won't be asked, hopefully, to be sitting there and dropping back 30, 35 times a game and asked to win a game on his arm. Because unfortunately, while it's happened in the past, I would not feel confident going into a game asking that of him because I just don't think that's who he is as a quarterback. As a quarterback at this point.
I don't think fans would be happy with that either, going into a game with that as the game plan. Yeah, you do wonder about the Arizona defense. Certainly the statistics would indicate that they are vulnerable against the run. With J.J. Watt going out, you would think that would make them slightly even more so. But to your point, a significant chunk of that yardage that they gave up was early on in the season to Dalvin Cook, right? I believe he ran off for 130 and change. So a lot of that average is going to be built into one of the most explosive backs in the league, right? And as much as we may like Elijah Mitchell, I don't think we're comparing him to Dalvin Cook at this point. All right, looking forward at the rest of the recap there, going from something that was a positive in good Jimmy to something that, I don't know, could be a concern for the 49ers coming up. How did you feel about the defense this week? For me, after several good weeks against Seattle and Arizona, it was a mixed bag, right? 4 sacks against Field, but got gashed on the ground pretty much by a mobile quarterback. 103 of their 176 allowed rushing yards were from Justin Fields. But again, after weeks 4 and 5, I was optimistic about the defense. I'm starting to have some questions now.
Well, I would say, and this is just from my first, I watched the game one time when it happened live. I will go back and watch the All-22 later tonight if I have time, if not tomorrow. But my impression is that the 49ers have a little bit more of a rough time. Everybody knows their woes with the mobile quarterbacks, but I think it's beyond that. I thought Chicago did a really good job of, selling the boot action with Fields to where the defense couldn't overly commit to the ball being handed off. And I thought that slight delay in making sure that Fields didn't keep and then run out on the boot, get out into open space, throwing the ball downfield off these play fakes, kind of put them in a bad spot. And I also think, too, not having Javon Kinlaw is huge. That's
yes,
one thing.
It is.
I understand people's issues with that pick. I understand people are upset DeForest Buckner's gone. But I have been trying to say pretty much since that first game he flashed against the Cardinals week 1 last year, it was apparent how much having a guy of that size helped that run defense and helped eat up gaps and clog the middle. And while he isn't logging a bunch of sacks, he's not logging an incredible amount of pressures and things that really jump out at people that they want to see, especially when we got accustomed to seeing DeForest Buckner, who's a phenomenal player,
right,
for so long. But not having a guy like that in Kinlaw in the middle has made such a huge difference. And while I think DJ Jones is a phenomenal player, he can't be expected to be out there every single down when the other team's running the football. And I thought he flashed and made some really big plays. I believe he did have a tackle for loss as well. But not having that body in the middle makes a huge difference. So while I don't want to make excuses for them because Javon Kinlaw is obviously out for the season now and they're going to have to figure something out,
right,
I do think that there is a bit of an adjustment that needs to be made because guys like Kevin Givens and Street and Hurst, I think they're very good rushing the passer. I think that's a very good unit generating interior pressure. I don't think they are quite near the caliber of run defender that Kinlaw was, though. And that's what's really hurting them, I feel like, is right now just mainly not having that body in the middle. But I did see some positives as well. As frustrating as it is to watch Josh Norman draw penalties every week, and I hate to say it's just kind of part of who he is as a player. He's very aggressive. He has been very good defending the run. He's always been a pretty good run defender. He's good at understanding
a sure tackler.
Plays. Yeah, very sure tackler. He seems to be good for one forced fumble a week. It seems like even if the other team's recovering, he's getting a ball out at least once a week.
He practices that peanut punch like nobody's business.
Yeah, and how fitting to do that in Chicago too. But yeah, so I think that I would be hesitant to panic just yet. But if you go back and you look at the 49ers run splits when Javon Kinlaw is playing and versus when he's out, that's kind of the common denominator. And I think that's part of the reason why the 49ers were so comfortable making that pick. And we can talk about the medical issues and the knee and all these other concerns, which I don't fault people for being upset about that.
Valid concerns.
But the player himself, the logic behind the pick, if the knee held up, makes sense to me. And while he's not going to be out there getting 12 sacks a year, having that guy to clog the middle is so huge for opening things up for other guys on a defensive line that's really talented. So that I would argue is the biggest thing I noticed. I didn't really I wouldn't say that was the reason why they had struggled to stop Jonathan Taylor in that Indianapolis game, just because I think that game was such an anomaly. I was there. I've lived in the Bay Area for 25 years, and I can't remember a steady rain like that just, didn't relent for 3 hours straight.
Yeah,
So,
I grew up in the Bay and did not have that type of weather growing up there.
Yeah, so I don't want to make excuses, but I also think that it's a lot harder to get your footing, to consistently get into your gaps and stuff in that. So it didn't jump out at me, but in this game, the weather was clear. There was nothing obstructing them. It was very clear that they were missing Javon Kinlaw in a big way. And Khalil Herbert's a very talented running back. I think that he's a guy that, when I covered the Senior Bowl last year, was getting a lot of love from scouts and people from that community. So I think that, you have to give credit sometimes just to the other team for being good.
Right.
But I do agree that it did look at times like they just had no answer. And it was very deflating because the Bears scored on every possession they had in the first half. And it wasn't just that they scored, it was that they were moving the ball upfield with ease. And that's been the biggest strength, in my opinion, of the 49ers defense so far, is when they haven't been committing these boneheaded pass interference penalties, they've been a top 10 unit in yards allowed. And the reason why I like using yards instead of points is because I feel like yards are much more indicative of how a defense is performing. Because, as we've seen so many times, the 49ers offense turns the ball over on their own 25-yard line.
Put the defense in a short field. Yeah.
Exactly. But the yards, you're going to have to, consistently move the ball on a defense to generate a lot of yardage against them, obviously. And they've been really good in that regard to this point. So I would pump the brakes on, being overly concerned at this point in time. But, it remains to be seen if Kyler's going to play this week or not. He does have that medial ankle sprain, so he might be out. But Arizona and LA are two of the most explosive offenses in the league. So I might be singing a different tune, but they also did hold that Arizona offense with a healthy Kyler Murray to 17 points.
17 points.
So I just think that they have the equity of the benefit of the doubt right now. And I think that it just was a situation where they didn't really get into a rhythm until later in the game. The second half, after the first Chicago drive, they held them to 25% on their third down conversions after they started the game like 5 of 6 or something like that.
Right.
The 49ers defense was a top 10 unit on third down this year. They've been pretty good about getting off the field on third down, with the exception, of course, of a few defensive pass interference penalties.
Right.
I would add real quick, yesterday was the first game all year that they were not flagged for defensive pass interference.
That was a miracle.
Baby steps. That's a good, step in the right direction. We'll see if that continues. But I just think, again, it was just kind of, you have to tip your cap. I thought that Chicago came out. They had a much better game plan. I thought that they did a much better job of getting Fields into spots that would be more comfortable for him. And I hate to put it this way, I think that they just benefited from having somebody else in control of the game plan rather than their own head coach, who I just don't think is very good personally. And I hate to say, the common denominator has kind of been him with these guys struggling in Chicago. And, Field looked as good as he's looked all year. And you could argue it's just because he's getting more starts, but I just think it was kind of a perfect storm for this 49ers defense. And they ultimately made stops when they needed to. And that's where I think I'm kind of able to, let them off the hook a bit. Like that sack by Samson Ebukam there on the last Bears possession was so huge to end the game there.
It really did end on a high note. And it seems to me as if you have pointed out some reasons for optimism. You share my concern with how defeating it can be if the 49ers defense cannot stop the run. You have to absolutely be able to clog the middle of the line of scrimmage and stop the run, in particular, if you know that they are attempting to run it on you. If you know the other team is running and you are unable to stop them at a reasonable clip, that is demoralizing, defeating. You are almost assuredly going to lose those games where teams are able to run with reckless abandon over you. And to your point around Kinlaw, while he may not rack up significant statistics, it is his ability to eat up space that truly adds value. And his statistics are reflected in the statistics of those around him because he's able to eat up that space and allow for others to do what they do and have greater production. If we put the defense in the rearview mirror and shift over to the last piece of the recap, ending on a positive there, How did you see the offensive line in their progression throughout the season, where they're at now? On Sunday, they did quite well, 0 sacks. Jimmy, again, didn't get his uniform dirty unless he chose to in running the ball. 0 quarterback hits, save for those that he had past the line of scrimmage. There was the rugby-style scrum where you're pushing Mitchell into the end zone, which to me was just one of those types of plays where if this season goes well, it will get replayed on a loop, right? They will go back to that one, much like the Bosa hydroplaning against the Washington football team in 2019. It appears statistically that they are vastly improved in pass blocking stats on the year so far in comparison to 2020. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yes. So, admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of relying on PFF for their grading because I think it's extremely subjective. I think that there isn't really a rhyme or reason that can be labeled as objective to it. But I do think that it is a good way to portray things like line play when it matches up with what you see with your eyes, because it's very hard to, you can't point to like receptions or yards after catch or completions and things that, skill position players have. So for the I just have to put that out there that I'm not a fan of doing it without, backing it up with what you've seen with your own eyes. I think this year, with what I've seen with my own eyes, the offensive line has improved significantly from last season. So I think that the biggest thing is the addition of Alex Mack stabilized the center position. And while I think Brunskill is kind of teetering on that average to below average, as a pass blocker at that right guard spot, I think he's been great in the run game. And I think that having Alex Mack there at center a year after they had so much, they had a turnstile basically at that position throughout the entire season, it stabilized both the guard spots, and it's made Laken Tomlinson and Daniel Brunskill and these guys have so much more, just consistency rep to rep, because I feel like for a long time on that offensive line, it felt like Mike McGlinchey was the only guy, and Mike McGlinchey and Laken Tomlinson were the only guys that were there every single snap. There you could count on week in and week out due to injuries, performance issues, and all these things. These guys are rotating, and I think offensive line more than any other position, even more so than quarterback and receiver, the cohesion and the chemistry from player to player is so important. And I just think that having that stabilized veteran presence in Alex Mack, in the middle has done does done wonders for them. The 49ers were 24th in pass blocking grade in 2020 as a whole unit. This year, they're 4th. So they jumped from almost a bottom 5 unit to now a top 5 unit. And again, this is PFF grading.
Right. Subjective.
I want to throw that out there. But I think that is something that is backed up by what I've seen on tape. And I think that they have been a very strong unit. In this last game, PFF had 3 pressures. I think it was Tomlinson, Trent Williams, and Brunskill, and McGlinchey were all recorded for 1 pressure apiece. So if you can get through a game with 27 pass blocking reps and only have 3 total pressures, that's a net win. I totally agree that Trent Williams is the best in the league. I don't think that the rest of the line isn't good. I think that Tomlinson is a guy who's proven to be a starting level player. Is he a superstar at left guard? No.
But above average.
Yeah, and you can count on him to be there. Alex Mack is a little bit up there, but his veteran presence, like if you go back and you watch that touchdown. So I wrote an article, I believe it's being published tomorrow, about the screen pass to Deebo Samuel on 3rd and 19. I don't like being over dramatic. I don't like making a big deal out of one play when there's, 60 or 70 usually on offense in a given game.
Sure.
That play to me saved the 49ers entire season. The
Absolutely.
momentum swing, the way that, to me, that game felt like Chicago had a complete stranglehold on everything going on. And then after, it felt like everything went the 49ers' way. And if you go back and you watch that, the amount of speed and agility that Alex Mack at 36 years old showed to get upfield and throw a block for Deebo Samuel at the second level, it's little things like that they were missing in previous years from that position, probably since Weston Richburg got hurt towards the end of that 2019 season. And I think that the problem with O-line play, and anyone who's familiar with the VSF Niners page, Brad Graham is a good friend of mine. He played offensive line in college, so I rely on him for a lot of this. And he always tells me it's so tough for the common fan to evaluate offensive line play because they don't have the luxury of sitting there and understanding the nuance of what the responsibilities are. And unfortunately, with offensive line play, you see a guy get blown up really bad. This has been the problem with McGlinchey for a couple of years now.
Yes.
When he gets beat, it is bad. It looks horrendous.
Because he's so tall and he loses leverage. Oh, yep. It looks atrocious when he gets beat.
And there's no way to sugarcoat that. But if he gets beat 3 times out of 35 pass blocking reps, to me, that's a net win. But what the fan is seeing, and I understand that not everybody has the time or the resources to go back and watch every snap like I'm doing.
Sure.
But I do think that it is unfair to just only focus on these bad plays. But I understand the optics of it is what I'm trying to say. Like when you get beat that badly, it looks really bad. But the problem with offensive linemen is that when they're doing their job, nobody's giving them flowers because it's almost kind of expected.
Right.
To me, I would say it's a thankless job, right, Rob? Like it's kind of something where you're not going to get a pat on the back just for holding off an edge rusher. But
a good day for an offensive lineman is when your name doesn't get called.
Precisely. So that's my biggest thing. I do think that, again, I think Daniel Brunskill is really good at getting out in space for that outside zone when they call it. I do think he has been a liability at times as a pass blocker, which makes it incredible that these matchups he has with Aaron Donald, he's able to stifle Aaron Donald, who's the best interior pass rusher I've ever seen in my life.
That's wild.
And so it makes no sense to me almost, but that's why I think they made the investment in Aaron Banks that they did. So I think the 49ers unit as a whole has been so collectively, improved that it's, are they perfect? No. And I totally agree. Trent Williams is in a league of his own. I think he's the best left tackle in the entire league. He is just an athlete that is once in a generation. For a guy
so elite
to move at the speed he does, to have the flexibility and agility he does, you're not going to see something like that for a very long time. Like Joe Staley is one of my favorite 49ers of all time. The fact that the 49ers were able to go from Joe Staley, who is an all-time great 49er, and I believe upgrade immediately, like that's one thing that I don't think they get enough credit for. And I understand that it's a lot easier to focus on misses, and they've had their share of them. But
they have.
Bringing in a guy like Trent Williams like that and then locking him down for the next couple of seasons, particularly when you think about how much they love running the football, was a huge win. So I think the 49ers offensive line has kind of been the unsung hero of this season. I posted something earlier. Alex Mack is allowing 1 pressure for every 80 pass blocking snaps, and having that ability up the middle is it's huge. He's allowed 3 all season on 242 pass blocking snaps. So I just think that there are times, again, I will add real quickly, I understand when you watch Mike McGlinchey or Daniel Brunskill or these guys getting pushed back, particularly just like you said, McGlinchey's so big and so tall, and I think he was a little bit lean last year. When he was getting put on his back by defensive backs, it was not good from an optic standpoint, but it also overshadowed the 5 or 10 really, really good plays where they had really good execution and really good, movement and getting upfield to the second level and all these things. So I think they've been really good. One other thing I would add, I do think that there were some struggles early on where it was very, very minor mistakes that I would have to go back and rewatch a play 5 or 6 times to fully, see, where they were just missing running lanes. They were just missing their timing on blocks. There was a 4th and 2 again in that Arizona game against the Cardinals where Laken Tomlinson went to go pull on a design run for Lance. J.J. Watt, being the extremely talented player he still is at his older age, busts through the line, and Tomlinson ends up getting clipped and slowed down. So ultimately, Tomlinson's supposed to burst through the hole, clear the running lane for Trey Lance. And what ended up happening was him and Lance ended up going through it at the same time.
Right.
Which not only slowed down Lance, but instead of Tomlinson taking on that linebacker waiting in the hole, Trey Lance did, and the play gets stopped. And I thought that there were just a couple plays like that where it was just a really minor thing that, just like you said, it's milliseconds these guys have to react, that they've cleaned up the last couple weeks that weren't there earlier in the season. And as a result, we're seeing a much better product as a whole. So I don't think it was a play calling issue. I don't think it was a talent issue. I just think it was an execution issue. And I think the offensive line has gotten much better executing the last couple weeks. And now if they can continue that, we might start to see this 49ers run game come back to that dominant force that we saw when they had so much success, 2 years ago.
Ooh, well, you hit on it. Offensive line, there is no unit in football that relies more upon cohesion. It is the type of thing that builds week to week. So far, what we've seen in the season has built in positive ways from week to week. And what we saw, hopefully, is the product we're going to get going forward, because that would make a world of difference in the 49ers' chances at staying relevant. In staying with the 49ers' chances of being relevant this season, for our last topic on the day, Let's look at the playoff chances for our San Francisco 49ers. Yes, the 49ers got back on track with that win on Sunday. They're still sitting at 3-4, and it did come against a suspect Bears team, if we're being honest about it, even if it is a top 10 defense for Chicago. Even their above average defense was missing a key piece in Khalil Mack, so you could criticize that. If you were forced to make a wager today, which way are you leaning after Sunday? Are you more confident that the 49ers can make a legit push for a playoff spot, that seventh wild card that may require 10-7 or 11-6, or this team is lucky to finish the season above 500?
I'm leaning towards the playoff spot, and my whole argument has been the talent has been there. And for a couple weeks, I kept saying, just wait, they're going to come around. Just wait, they're going to come around. The talent is there. Like, my whole thing is that if I was a fan of a team, if I was running a team, had any involvement with a team, I would much rather be a talented team that has discipline issues than be an untalented team with less skill that's extremely disciplined and is very sound with their execution.
Yeah, because one is fixable mid-season, right? And the other is not.
Precisely that. So I think that the 49ers are on the right track. I do think that it always comes back to this. And I hate to say it really is dependent on what they get out of the quarterback position.
Yeah.
Because I think the rest of the roster is talented enough that they will be able to be in almost any game. And that's the thing is if you go back, yeah, they lost to the Colts by 12, but they were in that game till the very end. They had plenty of chances to take control of that game. They obviously lose the Arizona game by 1 score. They lose the Seattle game by 1 score. That was a game that they had control of early on. And then the Green Bay game, they lose because Aaron Rodgers is just, in my opinion, the best thrower of the football to ever live. And he makes a throw on that first throw to Devontae Adams over Fred Warner. That's just a generational. I don't think the coverage was bad. I don't think the defense was out of position. It was just an all-time play. So
freaking ridiculous throw.
Absolutely.
Ridiculous.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my whole thing is that I think that the 49ers have been right there. And again, I'm not going to sit here and just be like, oh, well, they almost won these games, because guess what? Almost winning games doesn't matter in the standings. I totally understand that. But it does lend me to be a bit optimistic with my projections going forward, because we saw on Sunday what it looks like when they're able to put it all together. They only put it together for one half and they scored 33 points. If they can get it together for 60 minutes, I think they can run with any team in the league. And especially once they're going to get guys like George Kittle back, they're going to hopefully get Dee Ford back. And I think Azeez Al-Shaair, who quietly has been one of the best players on the entire team this year, back. We're starting to see Brandon Ayuk get involved. If all these pieces start to come together, I don't see why they can't make a run at that playoff spot and maybe give a team a hard time in Wild Card Weekend and maybe steal a win. I don't think they're a Super Bowl team. I'm not sitting here with aspirations of them. I'm not going to go run and buy Super Bowl tickets this year. But I do think that they are a team that does have what it takes to get to that 10-win mark and at least start building some baseline consistency as a team that needs to be. And I don't want to say they need to be respected, because I do believe that teams around the league respect the talent the 49ers have and respect the offensive acumen that Kyle Shanahan has. But I do think that they need to get some equity with this fan base, particularly because the 49ers have one of the biggest brands in sports. They have fans everywhere, and they not only have fans, they have damn good fans who have been sticking with this team through a lot of turbulent seasons.
Some rough years over the last 20, Jordan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm 26, so this has been, most of my life. I grew up going to games at Candlestick every Sunday when they were just awful. And I wouldn't trade those memories for the world. But you know what? It would be nice to see that reverse and start to see some, consistent years. And that all starts with just making the playoffs. And that was my whole argument going into the season, was I had a discussion with a few people like, what are your expectations for the year? Just trying to gauge fan interest. And a lot of people were basically saying Super Bowl or bust. And I was kind of the mindset like, hey, if you make the playoffs, to me, that's a victory. There is so much turnover in the NFL. And I think people get spoiled by teams like Seattle and New England, where they're just in the playoffs, it seems like every year.
Yes.
Those are the exceptions. Those aren't the rules. And I think that the 49ers would do, it would be great for them moving forward just to get into the playoffs. And if they were able to win a game on Wild Card Weekend, I'm not a huge believer of stuff carrying over from year to year, because you have a new roster, a new coaching staff, all these things change year to year. But I think more so for the fans, I think it would start to give the fans a little bit of belief of, okay, that 2019 season wasn't a fluke. We have a strong team. We snuck into the playoffs. Now we have this dynamite, electric talent, a 22-year-old quarterback with a rocket arm who can run. And it really starts to create some optimism moving forward. So I hope that they can pull it off. selfishly as a fan, but more so, like I said, this fan base deserves nothing but good things, and it would be really nice to see them start to pump out a perennial winner that's in that playoff discussion year after year.
Yes, it would be nice. And I think you're right. You hit on that idea of the talented roster and the lack of consistency. And that leads to great frustration for 49ers fans because they can see with their own two eyes. They hear from the national media that this is a talented roster. They hear the continual reminders that this is a genius offensive play designer in the head coach. And sure, there are problems with consistency. The 49ers have struggled with injuries, no question about it. But at some point, you have to have those results. And this feels like a year where the results truly matter. And I think that the pressure for the front office, the organization has certainly built. Their customers are the fan base. The fan base are extremely volatile at this point because of all those factors we just mentioned. So they do owe something to the fan base. They do owe pushing for the playoffs because that is a huge lift. And let's not forget that this is a one and done system in the NFL. Anything can happen on any given Sunday because you play one game against the other team. COVID could knock out one of their star players. Injury can deplete a roster. Someone could have to travel east and start slowly as the 49ers did against the Bears. It's not a best of 7 series where oftentimes the better team wins because of the sample size. This is an incredibly small sample size, and therefore you never know what's going to happen. And I think the fans, like Manny did here, based on the talent level alone, Manny says, if the 49ers get healthy, make the playoffs, no way the second or third seed wants a piece of this team. That's how I see it, that if they can get right, get healthy, get some momentum going into this, it at least creates the excitement that we as 49er fans crave, because that's the thrill of this game. And I don't think any 49er fan should shy away from hopes of getting that wild card spot, of sneaking into the playoffs this year. That's where my hopes are right now. That's not where my expectations are, because I think it's going to be difficult. But after this next 2-game stretch, we will really know a lot about this San Francisco 49ers team. They're going up against tough divisional rivals this week against Arizona and the following week against LA. And that will give us a great taste of where we are going forward. And I'm psyched that you're with me on this playoff-bound room for optimism here. Well, I know that we're over here, so I just want to say thank you so much, Jordan, for coming and joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Again, go follow Jordan on Twitter at @splash_cousin. I think I added an S to that, so I'll fix that in the description down there. So it's /cousin_ in between. I'll fix the link, and Niners Nation is down there in the link in the description of the video as well. Hopefully we'll have you again on in the future. Just going to take a moment for housekeeping here to point out my next show will be Wednesday at 5 p.m., the 49ers Mailbag. Send in your submissions for that to 49ersmailbag@gmail.com. Hit me on Twitter. Leave a comment on any video on YouTube. I will get to it. Again, an absolute pleasure having you on here, Jordan. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It was an absolute blast. And anytime, let me know. I'd love to come on and talk football with you. Had a great time.
Excellent. We will most certainly do that again. And to all of you Niner faithful, thank you for joining us. Cheers. Until next time.